So the question that you might ask is, do we really need another channel, another talking head in the market for vintage Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And I think the answer is sure. Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is the Parkside Merchants channel. I am a private collector and investor in vintage trading cards, especially Yu-Gi-Oh. So I think for today's video, just wanted to do kind of a quick sort of a kickoff session, if you will, to kind of set the table here, give you all sort of an understanding about who I am, and then hopefully just kind of give you some insight into what this channel is going to be all about. So maybe what I'll do is just kind of start off here with a little bit of background about my history as a collector. So if you flash back to the early 2000s, 2002, especially 2003, I was very active in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, right? I wasn't very good. I was, as Kaiba would say, right, a third-rate duelist with a fourth-rate deck. Just some kid on the playground, had a whole bunch of stuff. Lots of the starter decks, lots of the original packs, a lot of the old LOBs, MRDs, all that old stuff that all got very much destroyed and played on the playground. But that's kind of where my exposure, I guess, to Yu-Gi-Oh really started, as I think was the case for many people. I was also a big fan of the original anime series, so watched a lot of that content and programming as well in conjunction with all the wheeling and dealing and the trading that you do on the playground. Plus all the dueling that you do there as well. I never really got to a level where I went to tournaments or anything like that, and never really got too carried away with the collecting side of things. But I did have, I think by the end of that era, a pretty sizable collection, probably to the tune of thousands of cards, many of which were in played or damaged condition, but a lot of them were pretty well cared for. And so that's kind of the, I guess, the origin story or the genesis of kind of my interest in Yu-Gi-Oh as a hobby or as a sort of a pastime. 2004 was actually, I believe, my last purchase of some of the vintage stuff. It was actually the Insect Queen collector tin in 2004. That was basically the end. I bought that, and then I don't really remember ever purchasing a lot of stuff after that. And so basically 2004 was kind of the end of my original exposure, if you will, to the Yu-Gi-Oh market. Flash forward about 7 years later, it's 2011 or so. It's been many years, right, since I had thought about the collection. I did still have all the cards in a box, basically. And in 2011, I decided to do kind of a comprehensive deep dive, analysis, review, whatever you want to call it, where I basically went through card by card everything that I had from the original collection there. And at the time, in 2011, the market was nothing like what it is today. A lot of the game had evolved a lot, right? The cards that I had were no longer really very relevant. There wasn't a huge market for like the vintage collectible card. I looked into the value for some of the real heavy hitters that I had, and it just wasn't all that interesting. You poke around a bit, I did the research, and I was like, well, this doesn't really seem to be worth very much. I'm not really interested in getting too much back into this, so I basically just did the review of the cards, took stock of basically everything that I had, and said, all right, now is not the time to really get back into this. Basically is the judgment call that I made. So, that was 2011. Flash forward 9 years. Now it's 2020, right? Everyone knows 2020 was an unusual year in a lot of respects, and I think not unlike most people, spent a lot of time at home in 2020, had a lot of time to kind of go through my personal belongings and different things, and there it was, right, that old box of all the old Yu-Gi-Oh products and items. I really had a lot of time this year to start thinking about that again. And the reason I did so, I think around July or August of last year, I got a tip from somebody that said, hey, dude, you've got that collection of stuff. You've got all this old stuff. Pokemon right now is on fire. Sports cards are also like going crazy. You really should like dust off that old collection and see what you got, right? See what you're sitting on. And so I decided, all right, I hemmed and hawed a bit. I was like, look, I've been there, done that, right? 2011, I did like a huge review of this stuff. I don't feel like going through all this stuff again. It's probably not worth that much anyway. And nobody cares about Yugioh anymore. I just gave a whole litany of reasons why I shouldn't have done it. And they convinced me. Have the time during the pandemic because you're spending a lot of time at home, can't go really anywhere, do all the fun stuff that we used to do prior to the COVID-19 situation. So long story short, I start going through all the cards last summer, July, August, whenever it was. And I'm doing some Googling here and there, checking out eBay, and I'm discovering that like there's a there, right? It seems like there's some more interest in this stuff again. The values of some of these cards appears to be pretty high relative to what I remembered from 2011 or 2012 or whenever. And what I was very intrigued by was, as I was going through eBay listings, there were some of these cards that were like in a plastic slab, and had this nice label on them. And those ones were always really much more expensive than the raw cards. And I was thinking to myself, like, what's up with this? I start Googling around, and I've basically discovered that PSA existed, not something that I knew even existed prior to last summer. And I also discovered that they were accepting Yugioh cards now, which was a pretty recent change. They were primarily a sports cards company that was now making forays into some of these adjacencies like Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon, Magic, all this other stuff. So I said, okay, look, I've got a lot of cards. Some of them definitely have a lot of value because they've been pretty well preserved. They're first editions. They're from the OG original sets. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna probably send some stuff out. So basically, over the past 6 months or so, I've been doing incremental submissions to PSA. I now have over 200 cards that are getting evaluated by PSA currently. I've tried to stagger them in different, smaller sized submissions so that if there's a really tough grader or just a really difficult person or somebody's having a bad day, it's unlikely they're going to grade all 200 of these things in one fell swoop. Since I've staggered it out, it's in different parts of the warehouse or however they organize these inbound submissions. So more on that later. I can talk to you more about my PSA submission strategy and some of the things I've been trying to do. But basically, I've kind of gotten really interested in the whole PSA grading activity. And while I was doing this, I started thinking, right, it's like, here I am, somebody that used to be really into this hobby, very passionate about Yu-Gi-Oh as a franchise, sending out several hundred cards to PSA to get them graded. Over time, I started thinking, after this stuff was shipped out, I'm thinking, what's the end game here, right? Are we trying to do like a full exit? Are we just going to basically get all these cards back, list them all on eBay, and just wash our hands, and walk away from the hobby entirely? Or do we want to kind of get back into this to a certain degree, right? And try to maybe hold on to some of these cards longer, and maybe actually go out there in the market and try to repeat the model that I've tried to do successfully with my collection, which is evaluate your raw cards, figure out the ones that are in really good condition, get those out to PSA, and then hopefully have a pretty big multiplier return on your investment, right? And so I started kind of getting back into it again. Started looking through eBay listings, looking at making purchases of raw cards that I thought were in very good condition based on the pictures that I could see, as well as purchasing graded cards that complement some of the stuff that I have in my current collection. Which, if you're a collector, you kind of know how these sort of things escalate. You start thinking about the graded cards, then you start thinking about registry sets. You start getting, it's sort of like a domino effect, if you will, right, with respect to how things can escalate when you're a collector. The other thing that I will say that I did is, over the past 6 months, is I rewatched the majority of the original Yu-Gi-Oh series, the anime series. It was something I had not seen for about basically 18 years or 16 years, whenever the stuff originally aired. And the reason I did that is it had been a long time since I had thought a lot about Yu-Gi-Oh as a hobby or as a collectible. And so some of the names of the characters, the cards, some of that stuff had kind of faded into my into the back of my memory, if you will. And so I wanted to make sure before I made any strategic decisions or investment decisions about my portfolio in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I had a very high degree of competency of the vintage lore and really understood like which cards were getting a lot of airtime in the series, which cards carried a lot of weight and a lot of cultural significance with the characters, all that sort of good stuff. Because what I think a lot of investors forget in this market is that the anime series is very much influential over how we determine which cards are most important or most valuable. It's not an accident that Blue Eyes White Dragon, Exodia, Dark Magician Girl, Jinzo, and some of these other cards are among the most popular and the most valuable for collectors today. It's because they played a pretty big part in the series with many of the characters that were some of the mainstays. So I do recommend, if you are very serious about this hobby, and if you don't really remember things very well and you're kind of just making willy-nilly decisions about what to purchase, go back to the basics, watch that series again, especially the first, second season, the Battle City season especially, just to try and get smart about like what stuff appeared in the series, what's the stuff that people are likely to remember, and what's the stuff that people are really going to be interested in purchasing going forward. Okay, so that's kind of the timeline, sort of recap for you about who I am as a collector, some of the key milestones that sort of brought me to today. I think just in summary, just kind of on the background piece, when you think about who I am, right? I am a collector of vintage Yu-Gi-Oh products. I do a lot of other trading card stuff and some other vintage collectibles. You'll see plenty of that on this channel, don't worry about that. But first and foremost, I am interested in the Yu-Gi-Oh series, and I am somebody that had originally thought about making an exit from the entire position that I have in Yu-Gi-Oh! And upon further reflection, deeper thought, and picking up on some of the signals in the market, I decided it was not going to be advantageous to do that at this time. I still have an interest and a passion in the cards and the hobby, and I want to stay involved in the collection hobby. I'm a pretty average collector of vintage Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I did have a pretty big position going into this from back in 2002 to 2004. You're going to see some of my PSA submissions here coming up, hopefully in the next several months. And there's some big stuff, right, that I've had for a long time that was pretty well maintained. So I did have a lot of, I wasn't starting from zero, right? I had a lot of stuff just sitting around that I was able to take advantage of, which may be a little different than some collectors who all their stuff was destroyed, or, you know, their mom threw it all away when they were a kid. Who knows, right? There's all kinds of people that have different circumstances. In my particular instance, I did have all of my original stuff in a box that was well maintained. There were no issues with a lot of the cards. So so that's maybe a little bit of a differentiator, I guess, from the average collector. What I will say too is I have become more interested in the investment aspect of this hobby. So while I'm not, you know, just a pure play flipper, right, or a pure play investor, somebody that's just like out there to gobble up cards and flip them and, you know, just basically run a business off of it. For me, it's kind of more of a pastime, more of a hobby. There's a lot of cards that I will never part with, or I have absolutely no interest in selling. And so I don't really think of myself as one of the people that's like a pure play investor, if you will, into the hobby. Another couple of things I just want to say with respect to who I am not, right? Number one, and this is important, I am not a world-class expert on vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! Or trading cards or collectibles, right? There's a lot of people on YouTube that have decades of experience and exposure doing careful analysis of these markets. There are people that really understand like every fine detail about the print runs, about the sequencing, about all these different things that are sort of very specific domain knowledge about Yu-Gi-Oh! As a franchise. I'm not claiming by any means to have that kind of knowledge or experience or exposure. I'm literally a guy that hadn't thought about Yu-Gi-Oh! For almost 16 years, essentially, and is now just kind of getting back into the swing of things. So bear with me on the channel, right? There's going to be things that I say that are probably not entirely accurate sometimes when I'm reacting to things or giving some of my opinions or impressions about cards. There's going to be things that other people know, and I welcome the feedback or the corrections or the commentary and all that sort of stuff. It's insight that's valuable to me, and it's valuable to everyone in the community. So I am not somebody that's looking here to clog up the airwaves and allege that I'm some kind of, first-rate, world-class, renowned expert in PSA grading and vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! And the lore and all this sort of stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing that I did want to say is I'm not one of these radical investors. There are some people out there, some talking heads, that are very emphatic and very passionate about the potential upside associated with the vintage collectibles market, and even more specifically the vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! Market. So sure, do I think that cards are generally appreciating in value? And do I think that there is some merit to diversifying one's portfolio to include the collectibles asset class, which may or may not include Yu-Gi-Oh! Products? Absolutely. Do I think it's smart for people to go all in, full ham on vintage trading cards, take out bank loans and lines of credit, do all this sort of stuff? Probably not, right? That's probably a bad idea for the vast majority of people out there. So you're not going to see me on this channel get carried away, kind of beating the drum on card valuations and all this stuff. But I do expect we are going to cover a lot of topics around pricing, market watches, and all that sort of content. So just be mindful of that as you consume the content here on this channel. I'm not here to be some hyperbolic, radical voice. Make a judgment for yourself, right? If you think that I'm one of these hyperbolic characters that's going to, try to tout card valuations and all this sort of stuff, like, fine, whatever. But that's not the intent for what I'm trying to do here or what I'm going for on the channel. Which is a good transition now into the second part of this video, which is basically our future plans for this channel, right? So here we are, 2021, new year. I've got a new hobby. I'm involved in vintage Yu-Gi-Oh! Collecting and investing. Now the question is, okay, there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff that comes across my desk, right? I've got a ton of PSA submissions that are going to be coming back in the next several months. I do a lot of mail openings as well, because I do still collect a lot of stuff that I'm either evaluating as a PSA submission candidate or stuff that I'm just looking to kind of build out my collection of raw cards with for other purposes, which I'll talk about in more detail in other videos. So the question that you might ask is, do we really need another channel, another talking head in the market for vintage Yu-Gi-Oh, right? And I think the answer is sure. In general, more voices, right? More perspectives, more analysis, different vantage points. All these sort of things are in general, in aggregate, valuable for the market. Now look, there's going to be some outliers. There's going to be some rotten eggs. There's going to be some people that have perspectives that might be detrimental or harmful to either the collectors or the investors in a market like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! In my particular case, I have a lot of perspectives, I have a lot of thoughts, I have a lot of ideas. I've got no shortage of content ideas for this channel. So essentially I'm just looking to offer another option on the table, right? Another channel that you can click on and get some different perspectives or get some different insights just from a different voice, right? Some of the things that I'm going to choose to talk about and some of the content that I'm going to publish, some of the ideas that I have about the market, some of the things that I believe are valuable are going to be different than some of the prevailing wisdom that you're going to hear from other influential figures in this space. So for what it's worth, nobody forces anyone to watch any particular channel on YouTube. And so if you are interested in the vintage collectible space, if you're a big fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, as well as maybe Pokemon, sports cards, Magic, some of these other adjacencies, it probably behooves you to tune in to more of these kinds of content creators to make sure that you're picking up on, signals and observations and trends and things like that. Because at the end of the day, right, these are still pretty nascent, pretty small markets. And part of the way that you can keep a finger on the pulse of the market effectively is just by listening to some of the boots on the ground perspectives, right? Hearing the voice of the market, the voice of the buyers, right? The people that are out there just, getting on eBay and all these other platforms looking for stuff. So I think that's all, folks. Hopefully that was helpful in kind of setting the table, giving you a bit of context on who I am as a collector, how I got to this point, why we're kicking off a YouTube channel, and why I think there's value in having another voice out there in this marketplace. So feel free to drop a comment, like, subscribe, There's going to be a lot of new stuff that I'm going to be publishing here in the next several weeks and months, so there will be a lot of good content here, hopefully, that folks are going to find interesting. We are on the ground floor of this channel. I am not a pro YouTuber by any stretch of the imagination, so I imagine there's going to be some issues that we're going to have to work through. Sometimes there's going to be audio quality or video quality issues. I'll work through that. I'm going to get things better as we move along, but look forward to having you all here on this journey, and thanks again for watching.